We'll get started. As I sort of introduce the Vermont Community Leadership Network and all of that, you're welcome to put your name and where you're joining from in the chat, so we know who all is in the room with us. Thanks everybody for showing up. This is a really timely workshop, and we're excited to be digging into civic health shortly. But first, I want to give just a quick overview of the Vermont Community Leadership Network, which is putting on this workshop in partnership with the Secretary of State, and as well as Michael and Susan joining from elsewhere. So the Community Leadership Network connects and supports local leaders as they build local projects, organizations, and other initiatives. Sorry, I'm just getting distracted by Zoom. And other initiatives that serve their communities and Vermont's urgent and long-term needs. So the network does this through a couple of different ways. We do these workshops, and we also host the Leadership Guide, which is a series of tools and tips for you as community leaders on a whole range of the kind of work that you might do, from outreach to hosting Zoom meetings and so much more. And we also host an annual meeting. The Vermont Council on Rural Development hosts an annual summit that supports communities, community leaders in whatever issues are most pressing at the moment. My name is Lauren Brady. I support VCRD's Community Leadership Network, as well as some of our community programs and our policy work. And Alyssa Johnson is also on the call with me from VCRD. She's going to be helping with tech support, and she manages the community visit program as well. And now I want to hand it over to Robyn Palmer to introduce herself, and then we'll hear from our other two panelists as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robyn Palmer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Civic and Voter Engagement at the Vermont Secretary of State's office. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see so many friendly, familiar faces.
And Michael, will you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Moser. I am a research specialist at the Center for Rural Studies at the University of Vermont. We've been partnering with the Secretary of State's office and with VCRD for years, and others, including Susan Clark on this call, to collect data on various aspects of civic health in the state of Vermont and other aspects of life in Vermont. I'm excited to be here and just really excited to have been included in this work. Thank you.
Thank you. And Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Nice to see so many bright faces here. I'm Susan Clark, she, her. I'm a trainer and a writer focusing on community sustainability and engagement. I'm the co-author of a book called Slow Democracy, which kind of looks at democratic practices across the United States where we can really locally empower folks. Also a book called All Those in Favor about Vermont town meetings. And so I consult with communities across the Northeast, but with, of course, a very special passion for Vermont. I live in Middlesex, where I am the town moderator.
Thanks, Susan. So for all of you who are in the audience, if you want to take a moment to put in the chat what you think of when you hear the words civic health or civic engagement and what you see in your own community, we'd love to see that happening in the chat, so that our panelists can get a sense of, what you all are already thinking about. And as you put your thoughts on civic engagement in the chat, I'm going to hand it off to Robyn to start our presentation on the recent Civic Health Index, which we're very excited about and so grateful to the Secretary of State for putting that together.
Thanks so much for having us today. Let me go ahead and get a screen share going. Okay, does it look right? Excellent. So hi, everyone. My name is Robyn Palmer, like I said, and I'm so excited to talk to you a bit about this project that I've been working on for the last 18 months. I was hired about a year and a half ago in the Secretary of State's office as a new focus on civic engagement for our office. So the position was new to me, but also new to our office. And in kind of trying to create an idea of what my position would look like, we came across the Civic Health Index project, which is run by a national organization called the National Conference on Citizenship. And it turns out that we're the 36th state to complete one of these reports. And we thought that it would be really important to do it as a baseline to understand where we're doing well in terms of civic engagement, where we have room to improve. And, you know, just in my first 2 years in this job, we've seen the incredible devastation of flooding across the state. Everyone's coming off of the COVID pandemic. And so we're especially interested in civic health and the way that it connects with community resiliency and trying to make sure that we can make key improvements and we know where those points are so that we can be more resilient in the future. When it got started, you know, it became apparent very early on that we were going to need a lot of partners to do this work. And so several of you that I've seen your names on the call have been part of these early calls that we had with people from across the state who are interested in this work and whose work is impacted in the civic engagement realm. And one of the first things we did was ask people how they would define civic health. And so here are some of the topics that, or the quotes that came up from those early community conversations. High levels of trust in neighbors, institutions, and ourselves, trust, belonging, and ownership, skills required to engage in constructive dialogue, understanding the way systems of power work in a community and what levers for change are, when people feel the community, in the community feel their systems work for them and that they're reflected in those systems. So the definition of civic health put forth by the National Conference on Citizenship is the way communities are organized to define and address public problems. So all of this input was part of our framework as we were looking at how we wanted to tackle this really big project. And I guess I want to just start by saying that every element of this could be its own 500-page deep dive. And so that's not what we were doing here. You know, we were, a lot of this feels like it's the tip of the iceberg in many ways, but it's our baseline and it's where we're getting started. So I just want to acknowledge that off the bat, because this is a really rich subject that could, you know, that leaves lots of room for exploration moving forward. So when we were looking at the data that the National Conference on Citizenship shares, by opting into this, they give us our ranks, how we compare to other states in many indicators, and also the percentages. And when we were looking at that, we also realized that the data that they provided, well, much of it was interesting and helpful, and I'll tell you about soon. It didn't encapsulate some of the key themes that came up when we were talking to our partners, especially around trust and belonging. And so we wanted to make sure, even though those things are a little bit harder to quantify, that we still included them in the report, even if you can't necessarily rank all of those across states. So in the end, we came up with these 6 domains of civic health. And you'll be hearing a lot from Michael Moser today, but I just want to recognize that he was a really instrumental partner in creating this framework and authoring the report. We went to the Center for Rural Studies early on because we knew we were going to need some help with facilitation and research. So this is a lot of this framework was in close collaboration with him. And I also just want to acknowledge our other primary partners. You may have seen on the first slide, Vermont, the organization that runs AmeriCorps in the state, the Vermont Humanities Council, and then Up for Learning were our other primary partners for this. And so these 6 domains are what we started with. And the other thing we realized quickly that was missing was we wanted to make sure that there was an emphasis on youth voice. And so I talked to people at the YMCA who've developed a youth civic health survey, and they were willing for us to use it on a statewide level. We're the first state that's used it in that way. And we ended up having 2,500 students, over 2,500 students complete the youth civic health survey. And then we worked with Up for Learning, which is an organization that's probably familiar to those of you who've come to other VCRD workshops before. And they helped us really analyze that data and bring youth together to get their feedback and make meaning of the data. And that's been a really instrumental part of this report, and something that we're proud of because we're one of the states that's really taken an emphasis on the youth civic health survey. So I'm going to go through and just share a few findings here and there. I'm going to try and go pretty quick because I think all of you can access this report and read through the parts that are interesting to you, but I think the conversation piece is going to be the most interesting. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So in volunteerism and donating, the first domain, one of the things we found was that Vermont ranks much higher in informal helping than it does in formal volunteerism. And I think that was not a big surprise to us. If you think of the flooding and neighbors helping neighbors, that feels like a very important part of Vermont, and the mutual aid networks that have sprung up as a result of that. And, you know, when we were talking with folks about this early on, a lot of people said just the language around volunteerism doesn't always resonate with people who might be doing a lot for their community, but they don't necessarily see themselves as a volunteer in the traditional sense. We also rank second in the country for donations to political organizations. So that was interesting. And the ranking second is something that happened many times. And we do not rank first in anything. We rank second in many things. And the same state does not rank first in everything. That was one of my big questions. But there's different firsts across all of these indicators. The other thing that we noticed about volunteerism that also may not be a surprise is that it was the highest in youth. So from our youth survey, we had over 45% of youth saying that they participate in formal volunteering. And then it decreases and then increases again over age. It increases again over income, and it increases again over educational attainment. So I don't know if that, you know, is a really big surprise to everyone, but that just is confirmed by the data that we received in this report. For political engagement, we rank second in the country for attending public meetings, and we rank second in the country for people who've contacted a public official. So in both of these cases, we sort of had to stop and say, okay, ranking second is really good. That's something that we can build on. And if you look at the percentages, it's not all that many people. 17.4% of people attending public meetings. So there's still a lot of room for improvement there. And that really kind of became the theme throughout the report, was like, okay, nationally, we're doing pretty well. But when we take this data to the ground and talk to people who are doing this work, that doesn't mean that we pat ourselves on the back and call it a day. Like, there is still a lot of room for bringing different voices in, making sure that people are can be engaged at a level that works for them, and broadening participation. Another piece of the political engagement that we wanted to show is you can see our voter turnout over the last 40 years, and it's remained quite steady, with people showing up for presidential elections more than they do during midterms. And, you know, there's certainly some room for improvement there. As the voter engagement director for the state, I'm certainly paying attention to those numbers. And I just thought it was really interesting to see the way it has gone over time. The youth political engagement that came back on the survey was one of our points of concern. Only 59.1% of students said that they intend to register to vote when they're able to. Granted, some of them are already registered because 18-year-olds took the survey, but that was a number that has certainly stood out to us as something that we want to think about moving forward and that we would love to see increase the next time that we do this survey. For social and community context, this was really getting at sense of community and sense of belonging. And again, we're ranking second in some big things, working with neighbors to do something positive for the community, and also discussing political, societal, or local issues with neighbors. Again, the numbers are not incredibly high. 31.8% compared to 18 is a bit better, but 14.2% isn't necessarily something to brag about. So again, there's room for improvement here. And I think the other piece about this is that when we were talking with people about it and in focus groups and talking to the youth especially, a lot of youth said, well, we don't have neighbors. And so it's another example of why some of these national, the language of these national surveys might not always be as resonant with rural communities. So that's an area that we want to think about moving forward as well. Another piece of social and community context around belonging was over a long longitudinal study, we saw that 62%, an increase from 62% to 78% of people that never report feeling uncomfortable or out of place due to things like their race, ethnicity, skin color, gender, sexual orientation, accent, or religion. So it's good to see that that number increased, but we are also really thinking, okay, there's 22% of people, almost a quarter of Vermonters, who sometimes do feel uncomfortable in their community. And so what can we do to make a change there? One thing that was promising from the youth survey is that 82% of youth report that they spend time talking with people from different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds at least once a month. And so that's great to see that there's more cross connection happening with the younger age group. Cultural access and engagement was another topic that we wanted to include here that isn't always doesn't always come right to mind in terms of civic health, but our office has worked really closely with the Vermont Humanities since I've taken on this role. I hope a lot of you have seen our comic, Freedom and Unity. A lot of the graphics in this report and in the slideshow are from a cartoon artist named Dan Knott, who was the lead illustrator for Freedom and Unity. And we as an office have really seen the value of bringing creativity into our civic engagement work and really trying to focus on that cultural piece to reach people. So we wanted to make sure that that was an explicit part of the domains that we were looking at when we talked about civic health. Some of the findings, Vermonters are nearly twice as likely to report belonging to a group than people in the other states. And we saw that youth are particularly very involved in groups, with 70% of them reporting affiliation with an organization or in their community or their school. So similar to the volunteerism where youth was very high, that's because they have concrete opportunities that they can opt into. And so it's interesting to think about ways we can build opportunities that feel a bit more embedded in adult life. Another piece with the cultural access and engagement is that the Vermonter poll from last year showed that 93% of people strongly agree that opportunities to participate in arts and culture are an important part of thriving, healthy communities. But there's also been a decrease in satisfaction with access to those things. And a lot of that's probably due to the pandemic. But it's just important to remember that that is a sector that is still recovering from the pandemic and a place where we should still be giving attention and investment. Media trust and access. This is a place where we didn't have as many indicators. This wasn't part of like the national package that came to us from opting into the National Conference on Citizenship model, but it was something that came up again and again when we were originally developing the framework for the report. And so the one that we did have access to was the one you see here. We're ranking second again in the number of people who report they frequently read, watch, or listen to news about political, social, or local issues. It's not incredibly higher than the national average, but still ranking second. And we found that Vermonters seek out national and local news at about the same rate. It was split about 50-50. In the report, there's some charts that go a bit more in depth into different demographics and the type of news that they access. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend checking out that part of the report. For youth, one thing that we noticed that was interesting was that there are 72.3% of youth said that they never post about political, social, or local issues on social media. And that really goes against a lot of the language you hear around youth and social media access. And when we talk to young people, they said, well, all we know is that some of it could be disinformation, and we don't want to be a part of the problem of spreading the wrong information. And so that was an interesting, hopeful finding from the youth report, because a lot of youth are paying attention to political, social, and local issues, but not necessarily posting about them. And then the last domain is government trust and access. And again, this wasn't explicitly part of the National Conference on Citizenship indicators that we had, but we were able to, thanks to Michael, to look at the Center for Rural Studies well-being study and see that over time, this basically shows that Vermonters have more trust in local government than they do in national government, and that those trends have continued over time. So that's my quick speed through of some of the top lines of our findings. And then in terms of next steps, this list could be quite long. We, of course, want to develop more data. We have lots of questions that we have gone unanswered in the first round of this report. We're going to hold more community conversations, which maybe someone from VCRD can put the link in the chat. We have 4 coming up over the next month and a half or so if you want to look for one near you. We want to develop a civic engagement coalition to really keep the energy going of the partnerships that were created as a part of this work. We talked about building a civic resource map, continuing to support volunteerism efforts to improve access to civic spaces, and that would be both like physical access and access for people that might not feel welcomed in traditional civic spaces, and expanding civics education, both for young people and for adults. So the report also goes more into detail with some of those next steps, but I'll just leave it high level for now. And Lauren, I was thinking this would be a great place to maybe ask the question of everyone. We'd love to collect your feedback about next steps that you would see feeling important to you based on your experiences in your community.
Yeah, absolutely, Robyn. And I wonder if, as I launch that poll, you could say, I know some of these have some more background to them, and maybe you want to talk about that for a couple of them as I launch the poll.
Sure, yeah.
Great. Okay, so folks, a poll is going to be popping up on your screen. For those of you in the car, I don't think that this will work for you, or calling in from a phone. But for those of you on your computer or otherwise looking at a screen, I think this will work for you. And put any questions or things that aren't working in the chat, and we can help you out. Here we go.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to, because I feel like I'm going to go too in depth on all of them, or I was trying to keep it really high level. But I think I can say with expanding on civics education, that's a big part of my role so far, has been working with teachers. We have a teacher advisory group, and we're trying to create some Vermont specific civics curriculum that won't be required, but that is available for teachers who want the developing more data, we have so many questions there. I think, we're really interested in being able to disaggregate more by different socioeconomic groups and understand what, geographically and what different groups are experiencing and how we can improve things for people that are not feeling as welcome in spaces, and also learn from places in the state where they're doing really cool things that are helping these move the needle on these issues. We're also, I think with the volunteerism part, that you can look at formal volunteerism, like in programs like AmeriCorps, or a weekly volunteering at a nonprofit. We're also thinking about volunteerism in terms of serving on boards and commissions, and that there's a lot of vacancies across the state, and some of these key roles that in other places might be paid positions, but in the Vermont model are volunteer and really important in terms of keeping things going in town. So thinking about volunteerism broadly, and then also within that thinking about mutual aid networks and all of the informal helping that's been so important during the last few challenging circumstances that we've had with flooding.
There's a question in the chat. What is a civic resources map that I think would help?
Yeah, there's a few national models out right now. There's one called Mapping Healthy Democracy Ecosystems. And there's another one, I might get the name wrong, so I'll probably just not say it right now. But with the idea of creating an interactive map so that people that want to get involved or are looking for access to civic resources, whether that be opportunities to volunteer or trainings or ability, even things like a media and like knowing where there's access to local public television that's live streaming the events in your town, so that you can keep up with those meetings and what's going on locally. So creating a map of the state that has different overlays in terms of what resources are around the 6 domains, and kind of a one-stop shop for people who are looking for different resources.
Great. All right, well, people are still filling it out. I'll give folks another minute, but we've got some high participation. We love the civic engagement live in this workshop together.
Yeah, it's been, every time we have an event around this, it's, talking about it while doing it, which is fun.
All right, folks, last call. I'm going to close this and show you all the results in just a minute. So take a couple seconds, finish up. All right, it slowed way down. All right, great. So here are the results. And if you didn't get to share, can you all see that I'm sharing the results? Okay, great. If you didn't get a chance to answer everything you wanted to answer, feel free to put it in the chat. We will look at the chat afterwards. I'll be sharing it with Robyn and Michael and Susan, and it will also be posted publicly. I'll put it in a resources document. The resources document will get posted when we post this recording to YouTube, and you all will get a copy of both the recording and the chat answers emailed directly to you. So none of this information is lost. We will come back to it. Yes, so here's what we've got. It looks like really high interest in civics education and community conversations, and also some pretty strong interest in developing a civic engagement coalition and local support efforts, a resources map. Yeah, and then it falls sort of under 50%, but that's great. That's really interesting. Robyn, any thoughts on these? Hand it back to you.
Yeah, we had our launch for these community conversations that we're holding in Brattleboro on the 15th, and I can't believe that's just last week. But it feels like a lifetime ago. But holding community conversations and expanding civics education were definitely the priorities that rose to the top in that group as well. And we'll be asking folks this question at all of our events, and so it'll be great to see how that changes. And I just glanced at the chat and saw a question from Laurel, and yes, we would like to expand civic education for adults, and I think that that's definitely where we could use some partners and some thinking, because it's not quite as directive aligned as it is with connecting with K-12 teachers, which is what I've been doing a lot of, but we that is certainly part of all of our conversations. I think that's all I've got for now.
Okay. Shall we start some panel questions then, or? All right, great. And folks, you may have to scroll back a little bit, but we did put in the chat a link to the report and the dates that that the Secretary of State is going to be having those community conversations. We can repost them in a minute, but in the meantime, I'm going to start us off with a couple of questions to our panel, and then we'll open it up in a little bit to questions in the chat from all of you folks who joined today. So let's see, where should we start? I think Robyn and Michael, I'll ask this to both of you. I'm really curious about the youth survey. VCRD has also been doing a youth initiative recently to learn what support for youth opportunity across the state looks like. And so I'm curious what you learned as you were distributing the youth survey about outreach and partnership with Up for Learning and probably others that might inform how you share the report now, or how you're gathering data for the next round of the report.
I'll take a first response, if that's all right, Robyn. Again, Michael Moser here from the Center for Rural Studies at the University of Vermont. We assisted with the YMCA-based survey. I want to thank the Agency of Education for being a partner in the outreach and reaching out to schools across the state of Vermont. Having, over 2,500 students from across the state of Vermont respond to that survey is really, really, really powerful. It's really representative of a broad swath of the student population. And I think, partnering with our institutions like the Agency of Education is important, not just for the outreach, but for going forward and doing that essential work of civics education in schools with youth. We have such high rates of youth participation in organizations and such infrastructure that is built within the public education sphere already. It's important that we build upon that strength and enable that strength to be forwarded on when youth leave the public education system and enter into everyday life as citizens in the state of Vermont, residents of the state of Vermont. So I think it's really important to celebrate that strength and then figure out ways to make that transition and move forward. So I did just want to emphasize that particularly. Robyn, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
I would just say, I learned a lot from working with Lindsay and Pat at Up for Learning and was really grateful for their participation. Lindsay attended an early meeting of partners that was, me and Michael kind of spitballing to many people on a Zoom screen and getting a lot of feedback on all of this before we dug in. And Lindsay reached out to me and, the best suggestions always come with an offer of help, especially when you're tackling a project this big. And she said, well, I really think if you're going to do a youth survey, you need to have youth look at the data and give you feedback on it and really participate in this process and not just hear about themselves in some fancy report that comes down down the line, or maybe never hear about it again, you know, just it goes off into the ether. And we'd love to help you do that. Like this, we can help you facilitate that, and we can bring a group of people together. And I was just like, this is the greatest offer. But you know, I think that will carry over into other outreach we do moving forward, is that, you know, as we're talking to other groups of Vermonters that represent a certain demographic, it's like, okay, well, a survey is one thing, but like we have to remember to talk to people. And if we do the survey, let's bring back the results and get people's reactions to that, because some of these results that we have from the national survey didn't necessarily land with people as representative of, you know, the truth that they're experiencing. And so, yeah, I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
That's great. And I think VCRD has similar experiences of, you know, it's so wonderful when there's a partner that knows a community well, whether that's the youth or whether that's, you know, partnering across different issues that people really care about. Maybe they really care about land conservation or agriculture, and partnering with folks who are already working with those communities. Yeah, we find that so helpful. So I think it's great the way that your report demonstrates that, and kind of is a role model for us to all think about when we're trying to engage folks in our community who maybe don't show up as much, or their voices aren't heard as much. I think this is a good point to maybe ask the audience a question about how they think we might hear from more of those voices who maybe didn't get a chance to give input to this report, or who didn't see themselves reflected in this report. So I'm going to launch another poll. And yeah, the question here is really, how can the Secretary of State's office hear from communities that may not have had a big voice so far? So you all should see that popping up on your screens. And again, you can put it in the chat if something about the poll isn't working for you, but it would be great to see some of what you all think in that poll. And again, we'll be sharing this, the results afterwards. And I see some of that happening in the chat already. I see folks talking about how important it is to have online options for engagement, graphic booklets. Some folks are planning neighborhood conversations around thorny issues. That's amazing. Yeah, and you guys are sharing resources in the chat as well. This is great. We'll make sure to highlight all of this when we do our follow-up afterwards. Yeah, so any ideas you guys have about how the Secretary of State's office can hear from communities that may not have had a big voice so far, or may not be really clearly reflected in the report so far? It's fine if it's just a couple words, just a suggestion that you've seen in your community work. Give you just a couple minutes here. It's been a couple minutes. I'll give you another minute or two to answer this poll. Okay, folks, 30 more seconds. So yeah, give us a short thought that we can kind of look at together. let's wrap it up. See a few more suggestions in the chat. Being cognizant of engagement fatigue, that's so true. Having food and childcare hosting events can be really helpful. Being cognizant of neurodiversity and who's engaging and making things accessible to different abilities. And reaching out to low-income communities through social services agencies. Yeah, absolutely. These are great. So I'm going to end the poll, folks. I'll give you a second to submit if you haven't hit submit yet. I see a couple more coming in. All right, I'm ending it right now. So let's look at these answers together. Let's see, you can see that people answered it, but can you see some of what folks said? I might have to share my screen for this. Give me just 1 second. All right. So some of the suggestions here: provide a contact for rural citizens to connect with. Yeah, maybe a phone number as well as an email. Helping towns establish equity committees. We saw some other suggestions about maybe a guide that different municipalities can use to help educate their community about civic engagement. Yep, I'm seeing partner with other types of organizations that have communication with, for example, communities of color, or new Americans. These are great suggestions. Representative to town meeting, that's interesting. Yeah, front porch forum, something that VCRD certainly uses. I'm seeing some local community initiatives. The Environmental Justice Network, this is really interesting, folks. Robyn, anything that you're seeing here that you guys have been working on, or that seems like a great new suggestion you haven't thought of?
A lot of them are great suggestions. I don't know. I think we're, thinking a little bit about everything. I will say, back to when we were talking about next steps, one of the things that's just been challenging for us in this work is that there's I was grateful when I came into this role that civic engagement, the office was taking an expanded look at civic engagement, and it wasn't just going to be like focusing on voting, but at the same time, this is a lot of work that isn't necessarily always under the purview of the Secretary of the State, or that it's not always we are trying to figure out what our role is in this sphere, and recognize that a lot of people have been working on this a lot longer than I've been involved in my role for the last 18 months. And so part of building a coalition around this is also trying to figure out who makes sense to be leading different aspects of it forward. I think it's good because I do actually have time, and we're building my role as we go. So I will be able to take on concrete suggestions and move forward on them. It's not just going to be a dreamy wish list on a wall somewhere. But at the same time, like, we as an office can't do all of it, nor does it make sense for us to be the leader on every aspect of it. And so that's why the coalition is so important. And just that is what came up for me while I was looking through that whole list, is like a lot of these things are going to require a broader reach than just my position or just our office.
Yeah,
In a
absolutely.
good way, in a way that's exciting.
Yeah, of course. And I think one of the reasons that we like to, I just think it's interesting, we collected all this information, all these great suggestions, and we're going to share them with you, Robyn, at the Secretary of State, but we're also going to share them with everybody who joined this call. So you all can think about which of these suggestions, there's about 90 of us on this call right now. If we each learned something from these suggestions and had a new tool in our tool belt for outreach and engagement, yeah, that could be really valuable. And we can all, I think, sort of take the things that really apply for us. So yeah, this is great information sharing. I really appreciate everybody who's, yeah, putting their voice out there and putting their suggestions out there. Um, Great. Well, I have a couple other questions for our panelists. So let's look at those and then we can turn it over to audience questions. So Susan, I would really love to hear from you. Any reflections you're having as you have gotten to read the report and see the reactions of those in the audience here, or maybe see how that resonates with the communities you work with. And especially, I'm curious your perspective on the narrative around volunteerism. I think we're seeing the data here that it's a really a strength of Vermont. And I think we all feel that in one way or another. But in recent years, I think we've also heard a concern about relying on volunteers and how resilient that makes our communities, or how sustainable is it to rely on volunteers. So I'm really curious your thoughts on um, this thing that is a strength and how we can build on it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's really intriguing. And I think the numbers in the report are really, there's a lot to look at there. I mean, I certainly would agree that, Vermont's volunteerism and political engagement, which, I mean, again, we talked about sort of, we don't necessarily delineate between some of these different categories. When somebody asks me if I volunteer, and I remember that I went to a meeting last night, yeah, that was, I didn't get paid, but, so I think our numbers across the categories are heartening in many ways. And they basically speak, I think, to Vermont's strong communities. And I don't know, just to be provocative, here's something that wasn't included in the report that maybe it's a way to think about this. Vermont is, interestingly, among the least religious states in the United States. Okay, we've consistently ranked down there around 50th, along with the other New England states, in terms of places that really where people spend a lot of time in church, in community that way. And so even while our Vermont community work is strictly secular, I wonder whether our civic life really does do a lot of the things that religions across history and across the globe have done, that are a human need, that are things like welcoming each other, making our neighbors feel welcome and comfortable, things like coming together regularly. Hello, Vermont ranks #2 in coming together in public meetings. We may not go to church, but we seem to like to go to meetings, and really holding each other accountable, which is interesting. I mean, when you think about it, we rank #2 in contacting our local officials, #2 with just knocking on our neighbor's door and checking in, discussing issues with neighbors, which we know is becoming more and more difficult to do. So those are, I think it's intriguing to think about what is it about human nature that makes these things, we need to do them, whichever outlet we find to do them in. And I think it's relevant when we look at that. I think it was on page 13, and Robyn showed the chart about volunteerism and sort of the chart of the ages and demographics of volunteers. And we can see that we do really well at getting our little kids to volunteer, like do as I say, not as I do, right? As we get older, it's harder to get ourselves out to do it. And we also see that sadly, like most aspects of civic life, it's easier to be involved as income and education increase. So those are definitely things to be concerned about. And we saw some reflection of that in people's comfort level when we asked questions about the limited data that we have on race and culture issues, also revealed that, I think. So knowing that, putting all that in context, I think, I don't know, I think that we need to remember as human beings that giving a gift, volunteering, giving is actually a gift to the giver. right? Volunteering and helping other people feeds our souls. So we need to make that easier. We need to make that available to as many people as we can. We need to do a better job of communicating volunteer opportunities. We need to create and make sure that we show volunteer opportunities that you don't need an advanced degree or special skills for. You know, human beings are highly social animals. So how much can we make volunteer opportunities social opportunities? Places when we can get together with our neighbors to help to do a thing. These are, I think, basic human needs that we can help feed, and they can really support each other to make volunteerism and communities more sustainable and also make our lives happier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Michael or Robyn, do you want to, either of you want to chime in on this or share any other reflection where you're seeing a strength in the data and also seeing some nuance in how that plays out in real time?
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Susan, for bringing that up. I just want to re-emphasize what you just said, Susan, that, you know, especially as it relates to youth, you know, what we heard from a lot of the youth when we went back to them and talked to them about the results of the survey was that they want more opportunities to engage. And you know, these youth, if you think about, you know, what we're talking about, 10 years of, you know, it's like the past 10 years, these are digital youth. But they're not engaging online around some of these challenges. So we do have to find those, I believe, those in-person opportunities, though, like what VCRD is doing, the work that you're doing here today, and like the work of Up for Learning and other organizations that are, or spaces like our public libraries and our schools and other spaces that are outside of the public school system that enable youth and community members to physically come together and sit together and share stories and work together. I think that's really important. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of digital noise in the world, and it's increasing every day, exponentially almost. And so we have to, I believe we do have to push back against some of that digital noise and find a way to cut through that so that we can have those interpersonal connections at the local community level.
One quick thing to add, it's more of an idea that came up from listening to Michael and Susan, and less an answer directly to your question, Lauren, if you forgive me. But I think I was just going to mention another way that we hope to see this framework being useful moving forward is, you know, this report is a statewide snapshot, but the framework of the 6 domains of civic health, we've talked about trying to create a school resource where young people could use the 6 domains to look at their own school community and what is the civic health of the school, or even look at themselves as individuals and think, okay, well, like, wow, I really do a lot of volunteering, and I think I'm pretty good on my media consumption, but I haven't ever thought about contacting a local official. Maybe that's like an area where I could improve my personal civic health. And so just in terms of trying to keep some of this work going in different settings and with different groups, I think I would just like put that out to this whole group that, you know, you can think of it beyond just the way we're looking at a state, but like looking at an individual community or even a single person.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, this is great. And I want to turn us to the conversation around political trust and political engagement. I think that the idea of, you know, using civic engagement as an opportunity for socializing and finding those community spaces where we can do that. I think that ties in nicely to political engagement and political trust, because I think one of the ways that we see political trust grow is when there is in-person connection, and when there are relationships being built over time. So I'm wondering, from from all three of you, but maybe starting with Robyn, and then we can go back the other direction to Michael and Susan. Um, are there any creative examples of ways that as you've looked at the report, but also as you've done your work over many years, that you're seeing communities working on specifically building political trust and engagement?
Don't know if I have any like shining example off the top of my head. I think we often talk about how our government here in Vermont is different and special because you can run into your legislator at the grocery store and things are very accessible and it feels a bit different than in larger states. And so I think that does contribute to some of the trust that already exists, but it leaves out a big the whole sense of belonging or feeling confidence. Sure, you can walk into the State House and sit down in a committee room and listen to testimony, but like, does everyone really feel comfortable doing that? I don't always feel comfortable doing that. And so I think I do think there's some things around like remote, the remote new open meeting law in our office. And this isn't directly in my purview, but our office just published a new training video on open meeting law, and a lot of things are going to be more accessible online. And so I think that is something that we're hoping builds more trust and access for people who might want to listen in and be informed, but either don't have the availability or the comfort level to walk and sit down in one of those rooms. And maybe it starts online and then you kind of know what to expect, and then next time you go it feels a little bit less scary. So that, I don't know how innovative that is, in terms of answering your direct question, but that's one thing that comes to mind for me.
That's
And
so funny.
another
We
thing
had
our
a
office is
suggestion.
working on a bit is trying to have, we created this guide for teachers that want to invite a member of the government to their classroom. And so whether it's a select board member or your town clerk, or I think I saw Sarah Haskins here, a town clerk, that helped a bit with that, helped us a bit with that. But, it could be that you want to invite the governor or a federal delegate, or it might be your town clerk or a select board member, but at all of those levels, bringing them to your classroom and giving students an opportunity to practice those skills in a safe, comfortable place might prepare them moving forward.
I was just going to say to your idea about how to make town level meetings a little more accessible and a little more friendly and welcoming. There was an idea in the chat about maybe having a buddy system or somebody in those town meetings who can help welcome folks who are new to those meetings. Welcome them in and help them know how to navigate that space. That's great. Michael, any creative thing that you're seeing that you want to share here?
Probably like Robyn, I'm waiting to learn more about some of the creative ideas, but I want to address something I just saw in the chat. It came through, engaging youth, going back to the youth theme, right? Engaging youth in town governance, I think, is really essential, but I think it needs to be more than just having a representative. Our youth need to have a voice that is actually voting and is actually participating in decision-making processes. So I truly believe, and that comes from listening to the youth and hearing what they want. They want to be more than just an advisor or just have a representative voice. They actually want to be heard and incorporated into those conversations. Are they younger than some of the other members of committees and boards? Of course. Are they less experienced? Of course. Does that invalidate their experiences and their ideas? I don't think it should. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I'll dive right in because I'm just exploding with ideas. I don't know where you guys are, but man, my phone rings off the hook with communities that are coming up with really creative, innovative, exciting, unique ideas. And it happens locally. That's one of the reasons maybe we don't hear about it as much, which is why I think it would be such a great idea to have a network where we could check in. and people could hear about the Bethel Operator's Manual, which, by the way, Google it. Fantastic. You know, it's like, hey, your blender comes with an operator's manual, your car comes with an operator's manual. How about your town? You know, and you can learn what's the difference between, you know, planning and zoning, and, you know, what does a lister do? And should I be afraid when they knock on my door? And, you know, just, you know, some of the structural stuff, but then also how do I get involved? And community-wide, not just municipal, but also, you know, questions about recreation, worship, you know, all the different ways that we connect in place. There's some wonderful examples of youth town meetings that are happening. Vermont Public did a story on the Woodbury youth town meeting. I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, and it's so great to hear these kids, you know, just stepping up to the microphone and talking about why they should spend their $500 on this playground equipment or that field trip. And that's how we raise small d Democrats. That's how we bring folks in to the whole democratic process early, and sort of have them feel why it matters. And shout out to Craftsbury. I think Wendy Turnbull's here. I know Craftsbury is also doing a youth town meeting this year as well. You know, I'm thinking about even just recently in my town, we had a Zoom meeting, I think it was last week, where we had each of the municipal officials from any of the ones that had open seats this year come to talk about, you know, well, what does the budget committee do? You know, what does the roads committee do? 2 minutes each. So we called it Mysteries of Middlesex Happy Hour. So because it was kind of like speed dating, you know, really, really quick. Just, you know, 2 minutes each. What are these? What does the bandstand committee do? What does the energy committee do? And we asked them specifically to talk about what are some of the volunteer skills that your group needs. So it's not just like, rah, 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 this is what we do. You need to not have to, you know, read a spreadsheet, but, you know, do you have a love of ferns? Well, maybe you would be interested in the Trails Committee. Or, you know, can you carry 50 pounds? Can you carry a tune? You know, what are some of the things that you could bring, you know, to your town? Because all of these things are needed. And we asked, do you have any creative options for volunteering? Like, are these things I could do from home while I'm caring for my aging parents? Or is this something that I could involve my children in? Could we drive for Meals on Wheels together? You know, is this a family project that we could do, you know, adopt a trail or those kinds of things? So I do think that those kinds of initiatives are definitely happening creatively at the local level, and not each one is right for each town. So that's why it makes sense to adapt it for the size and the energy of your community.
Thank you all so much. And I see that the folks in the chat are crowdsourcing links to those resources, and we've got some other things coming up in the chat, including Braver Angels as one resource for political engagement and building political trust. So now I want to take some time. We have until 11:30. And I want to give those of you in the audience time to ask some questions you might have. So you can do this 2 ways. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put a question in the chat and we will read it out for the panel. So Matthew, you already have your hand up. Awesome. Would you like to ask your question?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Matthew LaFleur. I sit on some of those high-profile equity seats across Vermont statewide, so I know all about this internally. My question is about volunteerism, which, you know, a lot of, you know, Vermonters are proud of that. But I'm very concerned that it's being used as an overrated overextension. Basically, for me, if I'm gonna volunteer, it has to be something that I love to do, volunteer-wise, not being forced into that. What I would like to see, you know, more of is compensating members of the public. I'm a very big person on equity. And we need more of that in the state. And that includes the youth too as well, because it feels like take it from my experience, volunteerism is overrated in a way where I'm going to just neglect and use it. Oh, Vermont's good on it. Vermont's proud of it, but I don't know your access need. And I'm just negating your access need right here now. But I want you to volunteer without understanding the individual that needs that help or those services. It ain't just about accessibility and accommodation. It's about that Vermont roots. Communities helping communities. But how can you volunteer when you're faced with a financial crisis or access needs that no one else is willing to understand or willing to help you to achieve that so you can succeed in volunteering? It's just, a question that's been, on my mind, possibility on other communities of color and other equity, across Vermont's mind too, as well. It's like, I want to volunteer, but I feel like, that's a tax that I can't do because I'm under financial stress, or I don't have enough time to do that good work because I feel like I'm not included at all or seen included at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, absolutely. The ability to volunteer and to engage in what's happening in your community is definitely something that's not accessible to everyone. Do any of our panelists, any of the three of you, want to address some ideas for how that could be more possible, or speak to any of what Matthew was talking about?
One of the, that I'm very cognizant of, sensitive to that, and agree that it's really, really important to think of the array of needs that people might bring to, because volunteering, as I say, is something that we want everyone to be able to do if they can. Sometimes it's not going to be volunteering. Sometimes it's going to be compensated, and that's the kind of thing that a community fund could, if your town has a community fund, which our town just started having, but could actually support, offer compensation for being able to come to some of the longer gatherings. Certainly offering childcare is crucial. That's something that we should be doing from the beginning at any of these kinds of meetings. Offering a meal is also really, really helpful, because it makes me able, as maybe a busy family member, to be able to just, okay, I don't have to think about what we're doing for dinner if I'm going to be coming here to this gathering. But also ways to participate from home, having those, while that human connection I think is really crucial, when we can, also having hybrid options, which Act 133 created a working group which is going to be busy all this year looking at better participation options. How can we improve participation? And that's certainly something for folks to keep an eye on.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, we've got lots of hands raised. I did see a question in the chat earlier that I want to address quickly. We've talked about this a bit, but one person said we've tried with varying success to include local high school students as members on our town committees. Any suggestions pulling from the youth survey that would help involve high school students on our town committees? Any short and sweet, suggestions from our panelists? I know that one way that VCRD tends to get youth participation in meetings is to go to the youth and ask them, first of all, inviting them specifically and inviting them with a friend, finding 2 youth or 3 youth, maybe in your local high school, who would be interested in that. That will help because they'll feel a little bit more comfortable. They've got a peer there who can back them up, or just sort of help them debrief the experience, that kind of thing. And asking them what time works for them. A lot of our youth have very busy schedules, and you might be hard pressed to meet them in between their athletics and their arts and their school schedule and all of that. So thinking about those things and talking either to teachers or the local principal, folks who know your youth, and talking to the youth directly about how it would work for them to be involved. Maybe a virtual meeting would be a little more accessible. Anything, Susan, Michael, Robyn, anything any of you want to add to that?
I would just add another VCRD plug is that I don't know, was it about a month ago now that VCRD had the Youth Opportunity Summit, and there was a lot of people in the room. I don't know, I'm guessing that there's some resources from that event on your website with feedback from young people, but it was really enlightening for me. And one of the things that one of the people said was like when they were, one of the youth in the room said was when they were first invited, they thought like, well, I'm not the kind of kid that gets invited to this stuff. Like you could all sort of like close your mind and picture the person from your high school that would be asked to be the rep to the school board or the youth rep to the town meeting. And so like I just, you know, the challenge is to like, sure, we want to give those high achieving students their opportunities as well, but like there are a lot of youth who maybe aren't tapped as frequently, who have a lot to share and perspectives that might be harder to guess, you know, like we kind of know the high achieving students, like where the, like we might know their mindset a little bit better, where they're coming from, that they volunteer to be on every possible thing and they're showing up at every event. So yeah, I don't know that that's really a strategy, but it was like a big takeaway for me is like when you reach out to a high school teacher or a principal, maybe don't say who's the first person that comes to your mind, but say like where, you know, how can we get some youth across the board to hear from a broad range of experiences, which is why I also like you're bringing a friend idea. It's like, don't know, it doesn't have to be one, because one person doesn't represent a whole group of people in any situation. And, you know, that's definitely true in the youth realm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an area where having a teacher or maybe a resource provider who can help you reach those youth. Also going to youth in their spaces. Is there a community center? Is there a library where they gather frequently, or go to their classroom? So yeah, I would encourage folks to work directly with the high school and to try to get, yeah, a broad range of different youth perspectives. I want to go to Monica, who's had her hand up for a while. Monica, what's your question?
It's real quick, and it's based in actual voting percentages at you know, at voting times, and I have been let's say disappointed by the turnout of people even coming to the polls in different at different times. Yes, we get more for the national voting forums, but the local forums are just as important. And I'm just wondering if there are ideas out there and suggestions to engage people in any community so that more voices are being heard at the polls, and those voices are informed. So that's just something that I've had. I've struggled with that, with the numbers there, and I would like to see more people come out to vote instead of the same people coming out all the time and making those decisions.
Yeah, I know, Robyn, I think you might have some information on ways that the Secretary of State's office is working on making information more readily available and so forth. Do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, our office is more focused on the statewide elections than the local elections. So I don't know if it gets exactly to your point. We have been doing a lot of outreach. The thing we've been thinking about a lot from like the civic health perspective statewide is around vacant seats or unopposed seats, and the fact that a lot of the same people run year after year and they run unopposed. And so there might be an important measure on a local ballot, but if you don't if people are not thinking about the people that they are going in to vote for, it might not rise to the top of the priority list. Or just if like we know with this primary, there was so many unopposed seats. And so it's just, there doesn't feel like there's as much incentive to go out. It feels a little bit more like checking a box than really having your voice be heard if there's not even a candidate that you running, if there's no one running against someone or, so it's certainly on our radar. It's certainly something we're thinking about a lot. And I think there's more to it than just getting people to show up that day.
I know the Secretary of State did put out a website with information. Robyn, do you have the link to that? For that, it was sort of what to know before you go to the polls link, and maybe you could link to that. I wonder if there's a way that that could be again a model for local communities to think about. And I wonder, Michael or Susan, do you have anything to add?
I agree that there's sometimes you have to hear something. I can't remember what his communications professionals say. You have to hear something 3 times or 5 times in order to, so yes, this is on the Secretary of State's website. Let's also put it on our town websites. Big shout out to Front Porch Forum, an incredibly valuable tool here in Vermont. And it's something many communities, I think, use well to remind people of, the deadline to get on the ballot is coming up, and these are the positions that are open this year, and what the heck are they? You can find a link to the website here. And so just so reminding again and again, when you're being the reminder, you feel like you're repeating yourself. But then when you actually talk to people whose interests are my kids' basketball first, my whatever aging parents second, and way down here is my community service. Having it help them pop it to the top again and again isn't repetitive. It's actually helpful. So using all those tools as we can.
Thanks. Jeff, let's go to you. Jeff Forward, you've had your hand up for a while. What's your question for our panelists?
The original community engagement tool in Vermont was town meeting. And a town meeting is an opportunity. It's usually the largest public hearing that a town will have. And the people who show up vote on consequential things, like how we spend our collective money. And yet it's always under attack because the turnout for town meeting is typically, if you're lucky, maybe 10%. However, the 10% that do show up become informed voters, and they really have the opportunity to understand what the budget is and what they're voting on. We recently voted to shift our town budget to Australian ballot, which is strictly a yes or no question, I was extremely disappointed. We did that in a special town meeting where ironically, there was terrific debate and discussion, it was a relatively good turnout for us. It was about 10%, and it only passed by 5 votes. My question is, one of the ideas that came up during that meeting was that could there be a hybrid where there is a meeting to decide on what the budget will be that is consequential, that people there vote on, and then that is the one that goes up for Australian ballot on the traditional town meeting day. I've heard that has been done in maybe New Hampshire. I wonder if there's a model like that might be available.
Interesting question. Do any of our panelists feel prepared to answer that? I'll also, okay, great.
Thinking about this so much lately. Oh my gosh, this is like absolutely front of mind for me. So thanks for that question, Jeff. And I think that Vermonters across Vermont, we've been especially since COVID, and it's been really front of mind that we get it's this tension between two good things: the tension of democratic quantity. We want lots of people involved, and we saw during COVID that ballot voting is going to bring out more people to weigh in on something like a town budget than if you ask them to a town meeting. So that's democratic quantity. And there's some towns who are just like, hey, more democracy is better. Boom, we're going to switch. And there are other towns who are like, wait a minute, what about democratic quality? What about those qualities of getting together, actually being an informed voter, like you're saying, Jeff, not just going, yeah, budget, yes, but actually being able to ask questions. Also, being able to amend. That quality of empowerment when we come together and actually find consensus, work out solutions together. Almost never do you go to a town meeting and come out with no budget. Like that can happen by ballot, right? You can just be like, no budget. Whereas at a meeting, it's like, no, we're just going to stay here until we work this out. What do we need to fix in order to make this move forward? So there's a quality question that we recognize and value. I think that what's crucial is that each town have that conversation. And what I'm seeing more and more is that towns are wanting a both and. We want both democratic quantity and democratic quality. And they're struggling. I know that Jericho is just initiating a process of having their initial meeting in January, and they voted to have that be an empowered meeting, like a town meeting, where you could amend, and then have the ballot voting happen in March. The trick is that this is actually making that an empowered meeting. There needs to be a tweak to statute in order to have that be an empowered meeting and not just an advisory one. So there are workarounds that Vermont towns are struggling to create right now. And I think they need a little help to make sure that they really get what they want. But yes, that does exist. This model does exist in New Hampshire. It's called SB2. So I don't think it's rocket science. I think that it might be a way that we could move forward for those towns that want it. In other towns, they're happy to switch to ballot, and there are other towns that really love their traditional town meeting the way it is. What I think towns want and need is a few more options to address just the question that Jeff is talking about.
Thank you. Let's go to Edward Payne, who has had his hand up for a while. And Edward, I think you're going to be the last question. I do see another hand, Jamie. If you want to put your question in the chat, maybe one of our panelists can take a look at the chat and answer it. So Edward, take it away with the last question.
Okay. We've been talking about trust. And for this new conflict of interest coming from the state, we have conflicts of interest in all of the boards I'm on. And I sort of resent being questioning my integrity by having the state tell me what in the hell I've got to do for conflict of interest. I believe I have integrity. I believe all the people that are on these boards have integrity. And I don't understand why we have to be registered with the state of Vermont that we have integrity. We haven't.
Okay, so the question is around. So if I'm understanding,
continues.
The question is around why we have a registration for conflict of interest.
Yes.
Yeah. Do one of our panelists have thoughts on why we have this registration board, or anything to clarify?
I'm not familiar with the registration system that you're talking about, but I do know that Vermont has a culture of it's a sort of communitarian culture of handshake agreements, of recognizing and trusting each other as neighbors, and I think that's what you're talking about. And you're talking about look at me, I'm your neighbor, trust me, I have integrity, and that's the recognition that you're looking for. I think that with an increase, the times we live in with social media and with so much information coming in from other places, some of that, and with an increase in being able to see some of the lack of trustworthiness in other places, I think has created that push for more sort of a formalization of what we have historically seen as interpersonal trust, and that's hard and sad. Yeah, I don't know if other panelists have more comments on the specific question raised here.
I'll just add briefly, having had some experience as well being on boards. I think a lot of times people on our public boards at the local level are often those people that have the most to say or have a strong interest in some of the policies and things that are going on. They may have experience in those places, and that's why they've been brought in. They may have some specific stake in the game, and that does happen, absolutely. I think that integrity is not universal. Absolutely. And I think that so it's essential that we have transparency, at least as a first step. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that these are challenges that need to be met, and they need to be met consistently, and they need to be met with some amount of strength, because again, integrity is not universal.
Great. Yeah. And I do just want to name, I think we have somebody from VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I think maybe it was Kathleen on the call. But the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is a great resource for those who are municipal leaders or community leaders to reach out to. Their contact information is on their website. They have phone numbers and email addresses that you can reach out to if you're a municipal leader and you have specific questions about what your responsibilities are to the town and to things that are sort of a little more amorphous, like this question about integrity. So I just want to plug them as another important resource supporting our municipalities across the state. And with that, we're going to wrap up, folks. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it out to all those who registered but couldn't make it to the meeting today. And we will share contact for Robyn in the notes, as well as a lot of the resources that I'm going to try to get all of the resources that were mentioned today, but you're welcome to send me an email if you have any further resources you think we should share out to this community. And keep your eyes peeled for an email from the Vermont Council on Rural Development for our next workshops and any other offerings we can support you with. Take care. Thank you so much to our panelists, to Susan Clark of Slow Democracy, Michael Moser of the Institute for Rural Studies, and to Robyn Palmer from the Secretary of State's office. Thank you all. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.